Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions. Your host, Bryan. We got a brand new theme this week. We're going to be exploring acoustic music. Nothing electric or electronic or anything like that, just good old-fashioned instruments and voices. We're going to be kicking it off with some Chelsea Wolfe. We're going to be looking at the song Be All Things. This is an official music video from her. Let's dive into this and see what she's bringing to the table today. There we go. I was trying to figure out the emotion on this. It was definitely a bit on the negative side, but it wasn't like melancholy. It's interesting too because the harmony of the chords, a little bit of brightness there. But I think especially with the guitar tone, it's very wistful. A longing for something. Ooh, the vocal harmony over here. The very thin falsetto. That little run on Burn, that was nice. Everything else has been these smooth legato movements. We haven't really had any fast runs, so that stands out. Yeah, having this final, I think, layer here, filling out the low ends, making it not feel as thin anymore. It flushes the sound out quite a bit. Oh, those really tight snare rolls. The harsh attack of the acoustic guitar giving us our rhythmic idea here. The little chirpiness on the top of the timbre before the resonant tones of the string ring out. Oh, we have a really big reverberant snare in the background, right? Gorgeous, haunting vocals, harmonies right here. Yeah. So we have a slow burn track here. A consistent A song structure. But what makes it work, what makes it effective, is that we always see a new light, a new side to the A section. What starts out as just a single vocal line and the acoustic guitar eventually adds in some strings and some percussion and extra vocal tracks, whether it's harmony on the melody line or it's foundational harmonies coming on the sides that fill in the low end and sort of sit around the song. There's always something that changes it. And I even mentioned there at the beginning, I had a tough time figuring out what the emotion of the song was. It definitely wasn't, bright and poppy and ecstatic, but I couldn't really figure out what negative emotion it was leaning into. And it wasn't until we had that first change. I don't even remember what that first instrument was, but it showcased a chord progression that was different than the chordal shaping that we got out of the acoustic guitar. And this gave me the information I needed. So it constantly recontextualizes things. I was even fairly happy at one point towards the end of the song with just the four layers that we had, but they brought in this low, was it low string? And yeah, I didn't even realize how much I wanted this low end area to be filled out, how much I wanted pitches down in that range, just to make this feel like a very full song because I was happy with everything as it was. And it's one of those small things that could easily have been overlooked. I think there could have been a version of the song without that final piece there, and it still would have been a great track. But it's a little detail like, oh, there is some space here. How about we fill that in too? And one more pass on this. And yeah, absolutely sells the ending for me. It's the glue that ends up holding everything together. Like when you put a beautiful, oh, this is a terrible metaphor. I was gonna say when you put a beautiful picture together, like a puzzle, then you glue all the pieces together to be framed or something like that. It's what holds it all together. But it really isn't. It's the icing on the cake. Honestly, that's a much better metaphor for this. Um, it ends up working so well though, and yeah, just a wonderful idea there. So that's sort of the overarching idea of the song is the idea of a singular concept that grows. But I think something else that I really enjoyed in here is the contrasting vocal melody composition. I mentioned that up until like the 2 minute mark, I had primarily focused or maybe only heard the legato movements, a lot of the notes that sort of just blend in together. There isn't a harsh notion of attack on a lot of these syllables. And especially when we hold out a syllable and change notes, it's this very fluid slide from one note into the other. At least that's what I picked up on as a primary writing style throughout the beginning of the song. And then we had that one run on the word burn around 2 minutes in. And that's when I started to key into some of that. I don't think that was the first time it happened, but it was the first time I heard it. And these little runs popped up everywhere. What's really interesting though is when I think about the runs, and I think about the slurs when we gently move from one pitch to another fluidly. A lot of the times, as you know, my little graphic here shows, it dips down. The runs all descend. Anytime that we move from one note to another fluidly, oftentimes, especially at the end of a line of a phrase, it dips down into the next note. We don't really have too many uplifting moments where we rise into something, and that does inform a lot of the negative elements of this track. What makes it feel so dreary? A lot of the movement is downward on it, which I think is interesting too. Am I done talking about this? Because I wanted to focus on the vocals for a second. I'm gonna try to keep that in mind about downward movement. and dreariness. But yeah, so we do have these little runs that get introduced, and I thought that was a really nice contrast to the smoother legato movement that I heard through. And to be fair, the runs typically are a bit more legato too. There is a softness in attack between the different notes, but yeah, just still a beautiful addition to the song and a great way to add contrast. Instead of these long, drawn out ideas, we have these faster, tighter concepts and sort of bounce between the two of them. Maybe in the middle of a phrase, we'll do a fast run, but to end the phrase, we'll do a slower, drawn out transition. And having the back and forth on that, I think, creates a lot of dynamic elements in the vocals, which I mean, for a majority of the song, the vocals are the primary thing I think most people's ears are going to go towards. It isn't until the end of the song where there's a lot of ideas going on that I think people's ears, their focus might drift a little bit and start exploring some of the other ideas, maybe even just engaging with the atmosphere in general rather than any specific instrument. And so, since the vocals are in focus for a majority of the time, it's nice to have some of these more contrasting elements in it to allow it to not feel as static as I think it can be. A lot of the vocal delivery is very similar, a lot of the vocal range is very similar, the production on the vocals is very similar. And so, to have these different types of nuances in it is going to keep it feeling fresh, which is really important. Actually, that's a really good segue. The idea of monotonity, of monotonous writing in this. Monotonous is the wrong word, I think, because the song is constantly growing and doing new things, but the idea of hearing a consistent sound across a lot of this track, and that is the very fluid legato style of movement. We hear this in all of the strings except, well, all the strings and the vocals, pretty much everything except the guitar. And this is an interesting point of contrast here because where I mentioned that the lead vocal melody constantly has these downward dips and downward movements, the guitar tends to find a root note and bounce up from it, returning back to the root tone, of course, but it's always rising action where we start at the bottom and move away from it rather than starting at the top and coming down. And I find this to be really interesting. It creates a counter to what a majority of the song melodically is doing, but there's also something else the guitar does differently, and it's harder attacks. I wouldn't necessarily say they're staccato. They're sort of in the middle between a very short staccato attack and a very long legato attack. But the interesting thing about it is that there is a harsh inflection to the beginning of the notes. There's almost a chirpiness as maybe the nails or the pick stops rubbing against the string, and then we get the warmth of the resonant tone. And that chirpiness, especially with the rigidity of attack, I think they're consonant eighth notes on the guitar, it creates this rhythmic pulse. Not really a pattern, not really a groove, but a pulse. 2 hits every beat. And it's just this constant sound. It doesn't really stand out as much at the beginning of the song. At least I didn't really pick up on it too much or give it much import. But by the end of the song, when we have so many legato ideas, it definitely stands out then. And I thought it was really interesting that even after we added drums, a percussion instrument primarily used for rhythm, our rhythmic instrument is still the acoustic guitar. And it does double duty. We do have those resonant warm tones when the strings ring out, and that allows us to have this really warm floor, the sound bed, well, a bed up until the lower notes come in at the end of the song, but it provides our sound bed for a majority of this track, especially being center channel, where almost everything else is pushed out to the sides as they're added in. And so we have that resonant tone, but we also have this rhythmic, higher pitch kind of chirpy sound. And it cuts through everything. And that kind of amazes me. I don't know if that was intentional, if they specifically chose these strings and this guitar body to amplify these specific tones and overtones and whatever. or if it's just something that happens, maybe they're not even too aware of it. You play with the instrument for so long, you stop hearing some of the nuances because you're just so used to it. There's a lot of things that go into music making, intentional and unintentional. So I'm kind of curious how much of this was intentional, but I do think it's fascinating to hear this one percussive element in this sea of fluidity. Speaking of the drums, the penultimate section comes in and we have these really tight, quiet snare drum rolls. In fact, during the reaction, I don't remember if I vocalized this or not, but I wanted to bring this up later. There's something interesting about this. It could be, and here's the thing too, right? I call it a tight snare roll. And that's because it's the different attacks are very, very close to each other. There's not a lot of space. The notes are tightly packed. But there's also, to me, a little bit of ambiguity, and there is a constant reduction of volume to them, and they're already quiet. There's something about this that almost doesn't feel human. The best thing I could envision in my mind is holding two drumsticks, dropping one before the other, and then sort of just letting gravity do its thing with rebounds. It hits the drum head, bounces off a little, hits again, bounces off even less, hits again. And so you're going to have a reduction of volume on each hit. Maybe tightening the area that you hold the stick with just enough to get a rapid hit rather than like a da 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 da. But even then, it is so quiet. I mean, we're in the realm of ghost notes. We're doing a ghost note snare here. And so a part of my brain said, well, what if that isn't actually being played? And there's actually a good moment of that section where I wondered if it wasn't sound, vibrations against the snare beads underneath the snare drum that's creating a rumbling, a rattling sound that might be amplified, maybe, dang. Okay, so here's an interesting thing here. This is acoustic week, and I'm fairly sure that everything played here was acoustic, or if nothing else, replicated an acoustic instrument. Yeah, that's an interesting thing too. Everything here was guitar, violin, cello, and vocals, but the vocals probably had some digitization to them, some slight tweaking just to give them a different boost in some areas. Even if it's just an EQ pass, there's going to be something that's not raw about it. And the strings might have been synthesized using a library. Yeah, that's too deep for this week's theme, and it's going to be really impossible for me to pick anything out, unless it's just obviously like a 90s MIDI synth orchestra. I'm not going to be able to tell the difference usually. But anyways, where was I going with that? Oh, yeah. In post-production, though, possibly boosting up the low end of this the snare roll. And it's not the snare vibration. That's kind of what I thought was going on there. But then we actually did have these very wide, reverberary snare drum hits afterwards. So maybe this dude just has a really good, a very light snare roll. Either way, it kind of blew my mind, and at this point I'm not sure which way it goes, but it ended up being a really great part of the song, and ended up being quite evocative for me because, I'm going to reiterate this, the drums, the snare drum right here isn't the primary rhythmic instrument in this song. It's the guitar. I mean, that's such a wild decision, but it ends up working, and it just makes so much sense too. Like, in retrospect, this would have been so bad if we put that eighth note groove anywhere, eighth note pulse anywhere on the drum kit. Even if we did like cross sticking and hi-hat, some really light tones, it still would have pulled away from the song, I think. And putting that on the guitar is just such a smart decision. It really is. Theme, Atmosphere, emotion. I already talked about this a little bit. It's very wistful. I think by the end of the song it does end up feeling very weighty and shifting into a bit of a sorrow or melancholy, but it takes time getting there. But it's not exclusively that. As I mentioned, there's bright uplifts in the harmony. They're not consistent, but they are they're not constant, but they are consistent. That is to say that they're not everywhere, but they are there often enough for me to say that it's a core part of the song. It wasn't just a one-off idea. Then there's also the very light vocal harmonies that we get at times, the very airy, whispery, ethereal falsettos that adds a lot of levity, a lack of gravity entirely that pulls against the heavy weight that the song shifts into by the end of the track. And so the song ends up being quite nuanced for me. It's difficult for me to say that this is just a sad, wispy, melancholic track, or that there's any sort of wistfulness to it as just a definite emotion. It's more complex than that. And I guess this is a good time to dig into the lyrics and see what is going on there and see if I can't extrapolate any more from that into the music and get a better read on the emotional atmosphere of this song. And now I'm wondering if this isn't supposed to be some sort of anthem. I can vaguely, I think, understand the final iteration of the motif at the end of the song as anthemic, a sort of power, not a weight pushed down, but a power put behind you to propel you forward. But I kind of have to squint really hard to see that reading. And so I'm more inclined to say that this is just Chelsea Wolfe writing music that she likes to write, which tends to be a bit heavier and drearier, and then singing about something that she wants to sing about. And so the two are vaguely connected, but not as strongly resonant. The lyrics and the music, they're not strongly resonant with each other as I think something designed to amplify both of them and unify them would have been. Although this is all subjective stuff, right? I'm just telling you what I hear, and I've only had one chance to listen to this. I've spent 4 minutes with this song. It's quite possible that you hear something else. Maybe you've listened to the song 24 times and you have a vastly better understanding of it. Let me know your interpretation of all this. How does the mood fit the lyrics? Which the lyrics are about wanting to be everything. There is a death at the beginning of the song, a negative element. It says, walking the old path turned me towards death. The ravens woke at dawn, and daylight plumed my skin. Then the air was full, simply composed of prey. The idea that who I was before didn't work out for me. I was chasing dreams and ideals that it didn't work. It didn't. And I literally, though also figuratively, died. And the chorus explains what the next step is. I can't stop. I can't let this death be the end. It must be a rebirth. It says, I want to be all things. Verse 2 says, warriors, newborns, queens, the lion and the wolf, gnarling at eternal sleep. Let it burn, hear it groan, restrained desire, cast it down. And this might seem like it comes out of left field, but it's because I purposefully omitted the second half of the chorus. It says, I want to be all the things. But after that it says, I've got to let go. And originally I had read this as I have to let go of the singularity and become the multitude. I am more than one thing. I can't hold on to a single vision of that. But this idea here of letting it burn and restrained desire, casting it down, I think it almost speaks out about wanting to do too many things, trying to pull that desire in and focus on what's important. Maybe what's important isn't who you were before. Maybe it's a fraction of that merged with something else. And through that, I kind of like this idea that the song undergoes evolution. It is a single motif, a single idea, very simple at the beginning, undergoing transformations. Each time we return back to the A section, the only section of the song, it is with a new idea, recontextualizes it. There are several sections in this song where I obtained a new bit of information that had me completely changing my understanding of the song. With the big one, again, being the second section where I finally got a grasp on what the emotional resonance was. Which I might be a little wrong on, though, too, because I kind of counted a bit of wistfulness, and I don't think that's what's in here. This is not looking towards the past or trying to, wanting something. This is driving. This is passion. This is achievement. It's not an idle want. It's an impassioned drive to become. And the song evolves into that, though. It gets larger and more defined as we go until it becomes very full-bodied and of multitudes. It is no longer just two simple ideas, like a melody and a simple guitar line giving us some chord shaping. It is now multifaceted. It is a lot of things. The harmony is more complex now. The melody has harmony to it. There's more layers to how the melody works. There's embellishing ideas. There's richer instrumentation. This song is one of growth, of shedding an idea of who you were so that you can take on what you will become. And I love that the song does the same thing. Those are my thoughts. Chelsea Wolfe's Be All Things. What did you think of this track? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Just give me your own interpretation on things as well. Put all that stuff down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. I hit the button too quick. We're going to let this roll, though. I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC, as usual. We do have one more video right now. Otherwise, have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.